Claude finished the response. You are a master YouTube script writer for the channel Machiavelli Forge, a channel focused on deep dives into human behavior, systems, and society. Video title: How did ancient humans survive massive injuries without medicine? Critical requirements: 1. Generate a 3,000-word script. Plus or minus 5% is acceptable. 2. Make it feel human-written, not AI-generated. Use natural phrasing, conversational tone, strategic repetition of concepts, not words. 3. Avoid the repetitive patterns of competitors. Minimize using the same specific words repeatedly. 4. Structure: hook, build, thesis, evidence, and examples, counter-argument, / complexity resolution, / insight, call to action. Style guide for how did ancient humans survive deadly winters without fire. Tone: focus on human behavior, psychology, cognitive biases, and philosophical implications. Use concrete examples from everyday life and research. Hook strategy: start with a vivid, immersive scenario where the viewer is placed directly in a specific moment or situation. Structure: approximately. Hook: 150 to 200 words. Start with a vivid, immersive scenario where the viewer is placed directly in a specific moment or situation. Setup / thesis: 200 to 250 words. Clearly state what the video is about and why it matters. Main arguments: 1,200 to 1,400 words. Build 3 to 4 main points with specific examples, research, or historical evidence. Asterisk: each point should have premise, evidence / example, implication. Asterisk: use specific names, dates, places, or research citations when possible. Asterisk: include concrete scenarios and anecdotes. Counterargument / nuance: 300 to 400 words. Acknowledge complexity and present a counterpoint or limitation. Resolution: 300 to 350 words. Return to the hook. Show how everything connects. Provide actionable insight. Outro: 100 to 150 words. Final thought that resonates. Subtle call to action. Stylistic rules: 1. Use second person, you, to create intimacy, but not excessively in every sentence. 2. Mix short, punchy sentences with longer explanatory ones. 3. Use specific examples rather than abstract statements. 4. When you would repeat a word too many times, use synonyms. Thing, concept, phenomenon, person, individual, human. 5. Include rhetorical questions naturally throughout. 6. Avoid corporate language and cliches. 7. Make research / evidence feel organic, not like it's forced in. 8. Use vivid descriptive language, but keep it precise. 9. End paragraphs with hooks that make the listener want to hear the next part. 10. The script should work when read aloud. Use natural speech patterns. Voice for Machiavelli Forge: intellectual but accessible. Skeptical but fair-minded. Uses dark humor appropriately. Questions conventional wisdom. Connects individual psychology to systemic issues. Respects audience intelligence. What not to do: don't repeat "this is" at the start of multiple paragraphs. Don't use the same opening phrase for multiple points. Don't be preachy or moralistic. Don't oversimplify complex issues. Don't use AI filler phrases like interestingly, surprisingly. It's important to note: don't create artificial drama or fake urgency. Don't make claims without some basis. Can be anecdotal if clearly framed as such. Now write the complete 3,000-word script for How did ancient humans survive massive injuries without medicine? Start immediately with the script. No preamble, no section headers. The script should flow naturally as if someone is speaking it. Imagine you're standing in a forest, not a park, a real one, somewhere in Northern Europe, maybe 30,000 years ago. You're hunting with a group of people you've known your entire life, which, if you're lucky, is about 25 years. The animal you've been tracking for 2 days finally turns. There's a moment where you can see exactly what's about to happen, and then a horn catches you in the side, and you go down. The wound is deep. You can feel it. Your ribs may be cracked. Something internal has shifted in a way that doesn't feel right, and the nearest thing resembling medical care is your group. A handful of people who know plants and fire and pressure and almost nothing else. You would not expect to survive this. Modern people, with all our knowledge of infection and blood loss and shock, might look at that scenario and give you maybe a 10% chance. And yet, and this is the part that should unsettle you, A remarkable number of people in that exact position did survive. We know because we found their bones. And their bones tell a story that medicine still hasn't fully explained. Here's the question that's been bothering anthropologists for decades. How did prehistoric humans survive injuries that should have killed them? Not just survive. In some cases, live for years, even decades afterward. We have a habit of looking at ancient peoples through a lens of fragility. Short lives, brutal conditions, no understanding of germ theory or surgical technique. And in many ways that picture is accurate. Life expectancy numbers are rough and heavily distorted by childhood mortality. But strip away the infants who didn't make it past their first winter, and the adults who survived to adulthood were often shockingly durable. What we're really asking here is something deeper than a medical question. We're asking about the human body's own capacity for repair, what it can do when it has to. We're asking about collective knowledge systems that predate writing by hundreds of thousands of years. And honestly, we're asking a quiet but uncomfortable question about whether modern medicine has made us better at healing or just better at documenting it. The answer, as you'll see, is genuinely strange. Start with the bones, because that's where the evidence is most direct. Paleopathology, the study of disease and injury in ancient remains, has produced findings that stop you cold. A 45,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton found in the Shanidar cave in Iraq, known as Shanidar I, had survived a crushing blow to the left side of his skull that would have damaged his eye and possibly left him partially blind. He had a withered right arm, likely paralyzed, possibly amputated at some point. His leg showed signs of severe injury. He was, by any reasonable estimate, substantially disabled, and yet he lived to be somewhere between 35 and 45 years old, which for a Neanderthal was genuinely old. His survival required sustained care from other members of his group. There is no other explanation. A one-armed, partially blind individual in that environment doesn't survive alone. What that tells us isn't just medical, it's social. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkaus, who has studied these remains extensively, argues this is some of the earliest direct evidence of compassionate caregiving in the fossil record. But even setting aside what it means about Neanderthal society, it raises an immediate question. How did the injury itself not kill him? Skull trauma of that magnitude causes swelling, bleeding, infection risk. Something managed that process. Something worked. Part of the answer is pure biology. The human body, when left to its own devices, is an extraordinary healing machine. Bone knits itself back together with calcium deposits called calluses. The immune system, under optimal conditions, which ancient humans often weren't close to, admittedly, can fight off infections that would surprise you. Long before penicillin, the body was doing its best impression of a pharmaceutical company, generating its own antimicrobial compounds in saliva, in sweat, in the tissue lining of wounds. But the body needs help too, and ancient humans provided it, often in ways that hold up under modern scrutiny. Consider what we know about prehistoric botanical knowledge, because this is where the story gets genuinely underestimated. Analysis of dental calculus, the hardened plaque on ancient teeth, has revealed plant compounds that we now know to have real medicinal properties. A 2017 study published in Nature involving Neanderthal remains from El Sidrón in Spain found evidence of poplar bark consumption, which contains salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin. There was also evidence of Penicillium mold, the same genus that Fleming would famously discover in 1928. Whether they understood the mechanism is irrelevant. They found, through trial and error across thousands of years, what worked. The accumulation of this knowledge is hard to overstate. Modern pharmaceutical researchers frequently describe ethnobotany, the study of how indigenous peoples use plants, as one of their most productive sources for drug discovery. Roughly a quarter of all pharmaceutical drugs in use today are derived from or inspired by plant compounds that indigenous and ancient cultures identified first. They didn't have double-blind trials. They had generation after generation of observation and a very direct form of feedback. If it worked, you lived and you remembered it. If it didn't, you didn't. For wounds specifically, many plants used across ancient cultures, from yarrow to calendula to plantain leaves, have since been shown to have genuine hemostatic and antimicrobial properties. They weren't guessing. Or rather, they were guessing, but they'd been guessing for long enough that the useful guesses had survived. The application of heat deserves its own mention. Cauterization, sealing a wound with heat to stop bleeding and reduce infection, appears in some of the oldest medical texts we have, but the practice almost certainly predates writing by a significant margin. The controlled use of fire was established hundreds of thousands of years ago, and the logic of burning a wound closed isn't complicated. Pain is the price of not bleeding out. Ancient people would have understood that trade. There's a third dimension to this that gets discussed even less, and it has to do with psychological resilience and the social architecture of survival. Chronic stress impairs immune function. This is not a metaphor. It's measurable immunosuppression driven by elevated cortisol. Conversely, social support has been shown in modern research to improve healing outcomes in ways that are still being quantified. A 2005 study by Sheldon Cohen at Carnegie Mellon found that individuals with broader social networks showed better resistance to viral infection even when exposure was controlled. The mechanism involves inflammatory response modulation, but the simple version is being around people you trust who are actively caring for you changes your body chemistry in ways that make you better at surviving. Ancient hunter-gatherer groups were small, typically between 25 and 150 individuals, with a close-knit core. Everyone knew everyone. An injured member was someone's parent, sibling, hunting partner. The motivation to care for them was both emotional and practical. You needed them to survive too. That social density created a caregiving environment that, from a purely immunological standpoint, may have been more powerful than we give it credit for. Add to this the role of what we might loosely call ritual. Anthropologists have long documented the presence of shamanic healing practices in ancient cultures, and while the mechanisms look very different from modern medicine, some of what's happening is real psychology. The placebo effect is not imaginary. It produces measurable changes in neurochemistry. The act of being attended to, spoken to, treated as someone whose recovery matters, activates biological processes that passive suffering doesn't. Pain management through social engagement isn't a soft concept. It's pharmacology without the pill. Now, to be fair about all of this, and we have to be, there's a significant counterargument that needs to be made. Survivorship bias is doing a lot of work in this story. The Neanderthal from Shanidar survived. He's in the fossil record because he survived. We don't have the bones of all the individuals who received exactly the same kind of care, used the same plant compounds, had the same social support, and died anyway. Ancient life was brutal in ways that aren't fully legible in the archaeological record. Average lifespans were short. Infection killed constantly. Childbirth was a major cause of female mortality. Dental abscesses, which seem almost trivially unpleasant to us, could and did kill people through sepsis. The honest picture is that ancient humans didn't have a secret that modern medicine lacks. They had partial solutions to a very hard problem, and a lot of them died from things that a dose of antibiotics or a surgeon with clean hands would have resolved in an afternoon. The fact that some individuals survived massive injuries is remarkable, but it shouldn't be romanticized into the idea that ancient peoples had cracked something we've since forgotten. What they had, more precisely, was an intimate relationship with the limits and capabilities of their own bodies, a relationship forged by necessity, not philosophy. They didn't have the luxury of not knowing what worked. There's also a distinction between surviving an injury and recovering from it fully. Many of the ancient skeletons showing healed trauma also show evidence of chronic pain, arthritis developing around old injury sites, bone remodeling that suggests movement was limited for the rest of the individual's life. Survival wasn't the same as restoration. Some of these people lived with what modern medicine would consider significant disability, continuing to function within their groups at whatever capacity remained. The goal was continuation, not recovery in the way we mean it. Here's what all of this actually means when you put it together. The human body is not as fragile as the modern medical environment implicitly trains us to believe. This isn't an argument against medicine. That would be absurd. But there's something worth sitting with in the gap between what the body needs and what we assume it needs. We've built systems that are extraordinary at intervention, and in doing so we've somewhat lost touch with the body's own capacities. The ancient human who survived a goring by an aurochs was surviving through biology, social care, botanical knowledge, and psychological support all working together. None of those elements was sufficient alone. All of them together were sometimes enough. That architecture is still present. The biology is identical. You're running the same hardware as those hunters. The plants are still out there. The research on social support and healing is only getting stronger. What's changed is the context in which those systems operate, and the degree to which we rely on external intervention versus the body's internal ones. The Shanidar Neanderthal didn't survive because ancient humans had discovered something extraordinary. He survived because the people around him understood, at an intuitive level that doesn't require conscious theorizing, what his body needed to have a fighting chance. Pressure on the wound, warmth, pain relief, rest, food, and the presence of others who needed him to live. That last one might be the most important factor in the entire equation. The will to survive, activated and sustained by social belonging, changes the body's chemistry. We've known this for centuries without fully believing it. When you go back to that forest, back to that figure on the ground with a wound that should be fatal, what actually determined whether they lived wasn't luck, exactly. It was everything that came before. The accumulated knowledge of 10,000 generations, the social bonds that meant someone would stay up through the night to keep the fire close, the specific plant that someone's grandmother's grandmother had learned to pack into a wound because it seemed to help. None of that is mystical. All of it is human. And what's quietly remarkable is that the same forces are still operating every time someone heals from something serious today, even in a hospital room, surrounded by machines. The biology hasn't changed. The need for social care hasn't changed. What's changed is the scaffolding around it, and the scaffolding has gotten much, much better. But it was never the whole story. Ancient humans survived massive injuries for the same reason any of us survive anything difficult. The body wants to continue. The people around you make it more likely that it does. And somewhere in that equation is the entire history of medicine, stretching back to a cave in Iraq and a one-armed Neanderthal who had no business still being alive at 45. If this kind of deep dive into what humans are actually capable of, and why, is what you come here for, then you already know where the subscribe button is. The next video goes somewhere darker. How ancient humans handled what we now recognize as mental illness, and what their methods reveal about assumptions modern psychiatry still hasn't examined. That one will genuinely change how you think about the mind. See you there. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.